in a cult for 7 years.
Keith Raniere is the most horrific cult leader.
I had to ask permission to eat. He was doing demeaning sexual acts.
It kept getting more extreme. The cruelty, it's beyond the pale.
We don't know how many victims there could be. I had no idea the worst was about to happen.
A jury in New York has found the leader of a self-help group guilty of 7 counts of sex trafficking and racketeering. Keith Raniere attracted some high-profile followers to his group Nxivm, including actresses and one of the heirs to the Seagram's fortune. But prosecutors say the group was more like a cult that had a secret society of sex slaves. Some former recruits testified they were coerced into having sex with Raniere. They were also kept on starvation diets and even branded with his initials. Raniere was revered by the group as the smartest man in the world. Joining me.
This is Side Hustle, episode 2. I'm here with India Oxenberg. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you coming on and talking to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So, one of the many reasons I wanted to have you on is because I couldn't quite understand how and why you were ever involved with Nxivm. And I say that because, I've avoided watching Seduced because I wanted to talk to you first and hear things from you.
Cool.
I saw The Vow, and that's how to kind of understand who you were. But I felt like with the people that were more featured prominently in The Vow, I felt like I understood why they were there. And that's not to say that I don't sympathize or empathize. I think I do understand why they were there, but it's just that I didn't quite feel for them like I did for you. And I think with you, I looked at you and I was like, this is someone that I would be friends with. Why is she there? You know what I mean? Like, why? And so it's just, can you tell me about what your life was like before that? Just talk a little bit about beforehand,
Totally.
how
And
you found yourself.
it's a great question because I think it's actually funny that you even say it like that. And it's so kindly said, like, why were you even there? Because even my own fiance was like, what were you even doing there? And so I have to kind of backtrack, and we do this pretty in an expedited way in Seduce, so not to take people's time and explain my whole life, but we do it in kind of a couple minutes in the beginning of the series. And more or less, I was 19 years old. I had just come back from a year in college in Boston, and I'm from Southern California, so I was coming home. And college just wasn't for me at the time. I really wanted to work and just kind of get that real world experience. And I'm super dyslexic, so traditional education was always pretty difficult for me. And I had a lot of insecurity about if I was going to be able to excel in college or not. And I had some experience in production because of my family. And I always felt like, I know that I'm familiar, I'm comfortable in that realm, I can go back there. But I also knew that I was missing a lot. I mean, I was 19 years old. I did not have a lot of experience in the working world or in life in general. I mean, like, think of yourself at 19. I have a 19-year-old sister, and I'm like, oh my God, you're a baby.
Yeah.
And so I think I had a lot of pressure on myself, especially from not directly from my parents, but because I had seen my parents have so much success at a really young age, I felt like I was like, what the heck is wrong with me? Why don't I have a direction? Why don't I feel like I have a purpose that's compelling me towards my career? And so I thought I was kind of defected and I was feeling lost.
Right.
Unbeknownst to me, I was like every other 19-year-old in the world who is lost and looking for direction. So, but for some reason I was stuck there.
You had a great family life, right? I mean, a great upbringing. I believe you're technically royalty. I'm not sure what that impact had on
My
you.
grandma is a princess. I don't have a title or anything like that, but I am technically by blood. I've got some of that in me. Yeah. And so I think I just felt an enormous amount of pressure to prove myself and to be something that could make my family proud. And I know a lot of people can relate to that.
Yep.
I just wasn't aware that I was amongst many in this particular stage of life. And I came back to California. I was living with my mom at the time, I think for a couple months while I was getting situated. And she said, "Do you want to come to an intro presentation with me?" A friend of ours had recommended it to us. And this was that friend who kind of is the one that tells you to do everything, like, go see this movie, go to that restaurant, don't date that guy. Like, you always have that friend who's
Sure.
kind of interjecting. And she was that, but for personal growth. So we really had a trust and a respect for her in that sense. So my mom and I decided to go to the intro. And there was something about the way that Mark Vicente and Sarah Edmondson presented the information to me that just like landed right where it needed to land. And for me, that was all about removing these fears from our childhood in order to kind of optimize our operating systems as adults. Like, don't get stuck by your old program. And I was like, that's me, I'm stuck.
Yeah.
Help. And
Yeah.
so kind of like I was desperate. I was looking for answers. I mean, I'm sorry for the cat appearance.
Sure.
And so I think for me, I was more vulnerable and even more susceptible because of my own vulnerabilities and my own kind of self judgment, thinking that I needed to be somewhere that I wasn't.
Well, you were the most
And
vulnerable because you were 19,
yeah,
right?
I was
You
probably
know.
one of the youngest people in the room too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So you were just kind of, eh, I mean, at that age, like you said, we don't know anything at all uh, about really the outside world, but about ourselves specifically too. So you were just kind of being fed into this thing. So you get there, and what was the pull beyond that for you?
well, to take the course.
Mm,
So after that intro presentation, they're like, we've got this 5 days. That's the intro
mm,
to our 16-day course. Excuse me, Rice. You're not welcome in this
okay.
Skype. Um, and so I turned to my mom and I was like, you know what? I want to do this. This is for me. Like, as if I was possessed or something. Like, it was so clear. And my mom was shocked because I was this ambivalent 19-year-old that couldn't make a decision for shit.
Yeah.
And she goes, okay. And I said, I want to do it with you. I feel like this could be a really good opportunity for us to bond. How ironic. And so we decided to take the course together. And it was from day one that there were red flags that we should have known, and we didn't. I mean, you can't know that you're in a predatory group unless you know what to look for. So the over flattering of people, the constant affirming of this is right for you. And I mean, there were many things. They also separated my mom and I on the very first day, which was a red flag for her. But they gave me a logical answer,
Mm.
logical in air quotes, which was you might not share as much if your mom is in the room with you or in the group with you. And I was like, you know what? That's really true.
That makes
Maybe
sense.
I,
Yeah.
right. And so that's how slick they were. There was enough logic weaved into their manipulation
Yeah.
that it was hard to see what was actually going on until after the fact.
So would you say that a lot of the other people involved there were a lot like yourself, where they just kind of felt lost and they were kind of searching for some sort of purpose or direction? Like, was that kind of the hitch?
There was I'd say that that's a good percentage of people who go for personal growth in
Mm,
general. They're kind of like looking for where they can improve themselves, how they can get better in their lives. So yes, that was. But then there was a you know, whole range of people that gravitated towards Nexium. We had like a Harvard contingency within Nexium. So it wasn't like a specific demographic or race or sex, although it was 75% women mostly.
right.
And so that says something about a lot of these groups because unfortunately it's a lot of the time women.
Right. Okay. And so how long was it before you encountered Raniere? Keith Raniere?
Months. I was a student at first, and then once I got through my 16 days, which was like that's how Nxivm broke it up, and we break it down, and I don't want to bore you, but we break it down in Seduced, and there's the first 5 day, the middle 5 day, and it all accumulates to about 16 days of coursework. And in order to finish those 16 days, you have to go to Albany because that's the only place that they offer it. So I'm 19. I go to Albany in the winter. The first time I've ever been, didn't even know it existed. Like, I'm making my way back east. Everyone's like, "Why are you here? It's so cold." I'm like, "Well, I'm here to take the course." And so I end up finishing that 16-day in Albany and staying with some other higher ranking members in the Nxivm community. And that's where I first meet Keith at a volleyball game as a student. And I think nothing of it. And so when I meet him, he's kind of unimpressive. Like, he was playing volleyball. He's short. He's got these little glasses. I thought he looked kind of like a Teddy Graham. Like, nothing, like not in an endearing way, but in like a bulbous belly way.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't any, and I say it like this because that's kind of how I experienced it. There wasn't anything that really strikingly unusual than things that I had experienced at other kind of groups like ashrams or alternative education. Like, it all kind of seemed legit, especially because of the people who they were inviting.
Mm-hmm. Now, from some of the other stuff that I've read and that I have watched on Nxivm, it seemed more like a corporate retreat. Much more than any, and I think that was kind of the game. No, like it kind of seemed like this,
You're right.
right? And
So they had many companies. So there's Nxivm, and that's the parent kind of umbrella company, and then underneath it they had tons of little companies that were all created by Keith that he would then put somebody else in charge of because he never really wanted his name on anything strategically. So one of those companies, which he created with Nancy Salzman, was Executive Success Programs, ESP. That was like the consumer front product, which is what you're saying. It's these kinds of courses for executives.
yeah,
But
corporate,
it was,
yeah.
but they didn't target just executives because they said, well, you could be an executive mother, you could be an executive of a small business, or you could be an executive of your own, internal world, and you want to grow and expand that. So they kind of covered everybody. Like,
Yeah.
there was no one who they weren't going to try to recruit. And I laugh at that because I only learned about the recruitment and how heavily recruitment was encouraged until I became a coach.
Wow.
So that's how they grow, and it's by forced recruitment, because you can't excel in the program, you can't ever make money unless you recruit people. That's why it's like an MLM.
Right. So just to go back a little bit, you were talking about that you saw the signs early on, but didn't know that they were signs. Can you talk to me a little bit about what those were?
I saw things, that's for sure. I
Oh,
mean, I even remember the first time I went into the Albany Center, which was like their main headquarters, and I remember feeling weird about it. Like, my intuition was still intact at that point. And I thought it looked kind of dingy, and there was a lot of shades of brown, and it was kind of crusty and like not well taken care of. And there were pictures of the founders, which included Keith and Nancy, on the walls. And it kind of rubbed me the wrong way because it reminded me of an ashram that I used to visit when I was a kid. I was like, I don't know.
right.
But I overrode. I mean, I didn't pay any attention to that
Mhm.
feeling. I just like suppressed it and ignored it. And I did that a number of times to the point where I didn't even really see or notice those types of red flags. And it wasn't until after, and I was able to look at my, it was 7 years. So it's a long time to try to, figure out what happened. And it wasn't until then and that I was out and I was able to look at things more objectively that I saw the red flags more clearly.
Mm.
Like what I said, the separating of family members in the beginning, the inputting of problems that you didn't really have before, but that were strategically placed because of them. Like, oh, looks like you have a really big problem with your mom. Like, you don't really know who you are separate from her. And so those types of thoughts, as slick as I could say them now, I could say that to anybody. And that's what they were doing. They were unlicensed people kind of leading people in a direction that they were unaware of. That's the coercive element.
So they were turning you against your family and friends. Wow.
Mhm. Yeah, and they were doing it in a way of, this is your highest value. How can you let that go, or how can you trade that? They would use those types of words because ESP and whatever we were doing within Nxivm was supposed to be the highest, purest value that you were going to support. Everything else would be considered more or less a distraction from that. So it's a lot of pressure for people, especially once they went into the coaching path, because you wanted to grow. I mean, I know for myself, I wanted to excel because I thought that I was in a program that was intended to help me excel in my life, not that was going to trap me further and further and become more dependent on.
Oh man.
Yeah,
Wow.
so it was I know, and I feel like sometimes it's pretty heavy because it can look like so many normal, legitimate things on the outside, but once you get into the nitty-gritty of it and you figure out what these people are doing is strategic and that it is very much like many other groups, and I started to see the patterns of behavior from predators like Harvey Weinstein's or the Jeffrey Epstein's, and how they use their position of power and the environment that they were in to use people and to exploit people who otherwise were well intentioned, in
Yeah.
my
Yeah. And I think that's really the thing that kind of especially creeps me out about Nexium is that watching what I've watched, I've felt those. I've been at points in my life where I felt susceptible to something like that, where I just felt like I needed to connect to people. I needed someone to tell me which way to turn, and the fact that they use this sort of, I feel like, I guess sort of corporate sort of way of doing things. It is a lot easier for people to attach to instead of using religion or some sort of link to God or something. That'll typically creep people out
yeah.
immediately. But the way that Raniere and Nexium were doing things was, and like you said before, this makes sense. I can explain this.
Right. They used the logic, they used science, they used all of these terms in order to normalize things that would otherwise raise a red flag like they should. And so even within their course, they have a class that explains how they're not a cult. That's like cult 101.
Oh god.
So, I mean, and now the fact that I know that, I mean, I can laugh at it now, but back then I thought like, oh, this is really helpful. Like now I can make the distinction between what's a cult and what's not a cult, but you're in it. Like
Yeah.
you're in the fishbowl and you don't realize that you're in the water.
Yeah.
So I think, and I'm actually really grateful that you said that, because I think a lot of people pass judgments on people who are in cults or people who have been victims of domestic violence or even just violence within their homes, and they think that they asked for this, or that they kind of knew what was going on, and that's never the case. You don't join a cult. You join what you think it is, and then you realize that it's otherwise. Like the same way you could say a woman doesn't decide to be in a relationship with a man that beats her.
Right.
But it takes the average woman 7 times to leave an abusive dynamic. Now imagine being a person, a man or a woman or whatever, within a group, that's a lot of pressure to comply and to follow the rules. And it becomes sort of a self-sealing system.
Right. Right. And can you can you detail a little bit of how they kind of broke you down? You know,
Mhm.
just what were those levels to where was there a point, and was there a point where you didn't even really recognize yourself once they had gotten kind of deeply into that?
Yeah, there was, but that took a while. And this is another thing that I had to learn after the fact, which was what I didn't realize was that I was being systematically groomed
Mm,
towards what they wanted. So there were many things that they were doing to me along the way that would seem kind of, or could be masked as kind of innocent,
mm,
where like you could say, when I joined DOS, things really accelerated. When I was a coach, there were many things that they did that were also abusive, but it was also masked within the, you're in a mentorship. We're here to teach you. We're here to give you feedback. We're here to make you stronger. So all of that I was absorbing and I was normalizing. Then cut to 5 years in,
mhm.
5 years of this, I am recruited into DOS by Allison Mack.
What's
And DOS was the subgroup within Nxivm. It was the secret sorority of women that was created by Keith, and it was a master slave dynamic in which women were recruited thinking that they were getting into, you know, private coaching, which it ended up being much more nefarious than that. Not for everyone, but everyone who was recruited for a certain purpose. And
Right.
we weren't aware of that either. So my group that I was in, my pod
Mhm.
within this sorority, which was overseen by Allison Mack,
Right.
was kind of a prototype. Like they experimented on us to see how we would react. And then they would do that on other groups, they meaning mostly Keith and the first line women of slaves that he recruited.
Mhm.
And it was just, there was so much that we didn't know. And
Mhm.
there were so many things that I did, and I know that I wasn't alone in this, like the other women in my group also did, to convince ourselves that what we were doing was okay. Like we had to make it work because we were already too compromised with the collateral that we had provided.
Right,
So
that's another
by
thing that made you give up information about yourself?
exactly, blackmail.
Right, okay.
So by the time I'm already in this and there's the sleep deprivation, there's the food deprivation, there's calorie restriction, there's penance, there's physical and mental punishment. Then there's also friendship and bonds and things being created out of necessity. Because it's not like we're out there in the open talking to anybody. This is a secret. The only people that are supposed to know are those within your pod, and you're not supposed to speak about it to anybody else. And that includes anything that happens with Keith.
Mm,
So I'm building here for you so that you can see how
yeah,
this is something that doesn't happen overnight. This is something that step by step you're being led into something that is more or less enslavement, and you're being used in any way that they want because of the way that the dynamic is set up. They have total control over you because they also have blackmail. So
ah,
it was a very scary situation that unfortunately, while I was in, I didn't feel the appropriate amount of fear that I should have. I only really started to feel that once I left. That's how much we were indoctrinated to believe that this was a good thing and that it was positive, when really the whole thing is so fucking twisted.
yeah. So, you just said you didn't even really know how bad this was until
No.
you got out. So that kind of that leads me to ask you, how did you even get out? I mean, how did that happen?
Well, took a lot of work. I'm sad to say that I was kind of one of the last men standing. I mean, I know that there's still people who are loyal to Keith, and that blows my mind after, you know, 120-year sentence. And there's still people who believe in him and are still supportive of him, people who I considered friends for many years. And it wasn't until February of 2018 that I left Albany and I went to New York City. And I had to consult Allison for any of these moves. So I told her, I can't get work here in Albany. I need to make money. I need to be able to support myself. So I started to just apply for jobs in New York City, like 25 different jobs. And I was getting no. Because as soon as you would look me up on the internet, it would be like branded sex slave or sex cult girl. And it was fucking impossible to even get a place to live, let alone a job. Finally, someone who I knew from LA who owned a chain of restaurants in New York City gave me an interview. And I just said to them, I was like, I will work so hard. I promise you, I'm a really dedicated person. You don't even have to pay me for the first 2 weeks. I'll prove myself to you. Just give me a job.
Yeah.
I was like, I thought that if I had that, it would be like the one thing that no one could take away from me because my life was kind of falling apart. So I got that job and I just totally immersed myself in it. And I was working 14-hour days because I didn't want to think about anything else that was going on in my crazy, chaotic life. And I know a lot of people can relate to that too. And I'm kind of a workaholic. And so I tend to do that naturally, but I was doing it in an extreme way. Like I was pretending like this wasn't happening while I was being chased in the East Village by paparazzi. So it was a little hard to ignore. It came to the point where it was a lot of interference into my day-to-day job because I was being harassed and I was being chased by the media and I wasn't willing or ready to talk. And so I was trying to avoid them while maintaining my job. And thank goodness I had a good relationship with my boss that I was able to maintain that. During that time, I also met my now fiance, then boyfriend, and he was very helpful and extremely instrumental in me being able to just start to talk about what had happened. And I was really stuck and it was very difficult for me to just share anything honestly. At that point, my mom also entered my life again. We were not talking for about 8 or 9 months, and we had a mediation while she was in New York the day that Nancy Salzman, Claire Bronfman, Kathy Russell, and Lauren Salzman were arrested. We were together in a hotel room having our first real conversation with a woman who was helping me. She's called a deprogrammer. Her name is Diane Ben Scooter. And it sounds kind of weird and sci-fi, but a deprogrammer is someone who actually is just there to encourage your own critical thinking, basically to get you to think for yourself and not outside of the closed loop of indoctrination, which is really dangerous because you can't think otherwise. You can only think within the context that they've taught you. So it was a series of things that helped me remove myself, but really just removing myself physically wasn't enough because I was still very much stuck in the programming. So it took a lot of work. I mean, hundreds of hours of therapy and now even years. And it's been a couple years now and I still fight against this stuff in my mind, negative thought patterns, judgments, you name it. And so it's not an easy road, but I wouldn't want to discourage anybody from trying. But I also know how scary it is to confront your demons.
Yeah.
And there was a point when I was a cooperating witness with the FBI after I had left for 9 months, where I was going back and forth every month to Brooklyn to work with them for days at a time. And I would come home and I would question my whole life. Like, who am I? What kind of human being am I? Do I know myself? Am I a monster? Like all of these really scary things that I had to confront while being very alone in that. Because when you're working with the government as a witness, you are strongly encouraged to not speak to anybody. Like your life is very different. You keep it small, you keep it closed. And I was doing that while I was processing all of this stuff. So it was kind of messy, and I felt that's when I hit my darkest days, like my most suicidal times, where I really felt like I don't want to be in my body anymore.
Mhm. So this was all by the time you got to New York City, this was all public, right?
Yeah.
This was
Yeah. It started a little local, so I thought that maybe it was going to stop and it would just phase out. And then it hit the New York Times.
right.
And that was like, what?
Wow.
And I, I thought, because we were being told when in the group that this was going to pass. They're
Right.
like, don't worry about it. This will pass by. These are just disgruntled employees. And I'm like, okay, if you guys say so. But I was still such a strong believer at that point that I wanted to stick by my friends. But it did become so public to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore.
Wow. So like you said, you were in New York and literally getting chased around and hounded by this point.
Yeah, it
So
was so scary. I did not know I just did not know how to handle that.
right. What was your reaction to seeing all of these people like Allison Mack and Claire Bronfman, all these people that you were so close to? What was it like to see them get arrested? Uh, yeah.
Shock. I was in shock. I mean, when Keith was arrested, I remember I was walking through Soho
Mhm.
on my way to work, because I used to walk from Brooklyn Heights to the East Village every day. Like that was my only alone time, were these 8 miles that I would do. Didn't matter what the weather was. I was like, I need to be alone.
Yeah.
And that's often when I would just like cry on the Brooklyn Bridge. And one of the things I love about New York is no one gives a shit. Like
Yeah.
if you're hysterically crying,
Yeah.
like
They're gonna
you're
walk right past you.
broken down, like crying in a corner, and then gets up and walks to work again. That was me.
Yeah.
And no one noticed. So I was like, okay, like great. Just one of many, thank God. And so I would do that walk every day, and I was walking through Soho, like I said, and my boss called me and he's like, hey, your guy, he's been arrested. And I was like, what? My guy? Who's my guy? And it was Keith.
Oh, Jesus, yeah.
And he was like, I don't think you should go to work today because it might be a little chaotic, but
Mhm.
you can come over here and we can get some snacks and you can just relax. So he just let me hang out with him for a couple hours while the media sort of tried to find me in that area. And I was shocked. I wasn't sad.
Mhm.
Strangely, I felt kind of numb to him. It wasn't until Allison was arrested that it started to hit me and feel way closer to home, like, oh my God, am I going to be next?
Right.
And so that was just really scary. And it's difficult to process. It's like, I mean, I had nothing to compare this to.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Allison Mack is, of course, a very high profile person. Even for myself, I grew up watching her on Smallville. So, like, to see what happened and what she was involved in, and to the length that she was involved in in Nexium, it's still bizarre to me. Like,
Oh,
it's still incredibly strange. Were you really close to her, or how? What was the relationship between the two of you like?
yeah, complicated. I
Mm,
mean, I didn't have much of a relationship with her before she recruited me for DOS.
mm,
I had met her a couple times. I had admired her in the community because I thought that she was someone who was really excelling.
mhm.
Um, I had also kind of avoided her because she kind of reminded me of that overly bubbly theater kid in high school.
Yep. Yep.
And I was like, not my type.
She definitely had
Um,
theater kid energy, and I didn't even know her, so
theater kid energy. And so I was like, no, you're not for me. You're not my kind of chick. But it when she recruited me, I actually was once again in that very low place and kind of in a desperate point in my time in Nexium. I was not growing. I was not excelling in the stripe path, is what they called it, which was their um, measurement system, like how you went from rank to rank. And so I was stuck. I was feeling really angry and really discouraged. And she caught me right at that time, right at that perfect moment. And it's when she offered me I'm saying this very optimistically, but the opportunity to be in what she called a women's sorority private coaching. I was like, sign me up. That's what I need. And I need someone to hold me to the fire so that I don't run away from my growth, or I don't run away from what's difficult. And I thought that that's what she was providing me. So I was really open with her, really honest. Our relationship was really awkward in the beginning because I feel like she was kind of trying to force a lot of intimacy that I wasn't ready to have. And I think she kind of was a little attracted to me. And I was not attracted to her. I was looking at this as I was like, you're going to mentor me. You're not going to be my girlfriend. But it became that I was instructed to live with her, and that instruction came directly from Keith. And then I had to permanently relocate to Albany. So my relationship with her changed dramatically when I lived with her. And so every day I was it was a combination between walking on eggshells because I didn't want to upset her as my master, and then also being very cautious of my behavior and my conduct, because I wanted to do well. And I wanted to do well in what I thought was a program that was going to help me get stronger as a woman. And the thing about Allison that is most disturbing to me in context to Doss is that she enjoyed her role as master. Like, she got off on it.
Like, she seemed like a believer from the beginning.
Yeah.
That correct?
Yeah, because you watched The Vow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that kind of, like, looking back, that disturbs me more and more now that I see it for what it is. And I remember, like, not really being able to believe that totally when I was there, because I hated that position. It made me feel so uncomfortable. I don't like telling people what to do. I don't like being bossy in that way. And so I was always trying to manage my own discomfort with what I was being forced to do, which was then recruit other people into this program. And so it's just so hard to explain sometimes, because I think about the Stanford Prison Project a lot, and that was one of the things that Keith studied quite a bit, and he had us watch tons of times. And he was obsessed with it, like this concept of watching people turn against each other or become, like what happened with Doss, a real master-slave dynamic where you actually have total control over another human being, which is so, like, horrendous to me now, thinking that I put myself in a position like that. Obviously, I didn't know what I was getting myself into when I said yes, but I was in a situation where I had to normalize and be okay with abuse, with consistent abuse. And that is really disturbing that we couldn't even see it as such. That's what I'm trying to get to.
And so in Dawes, like you just said, there was a literal master-slave relationship. What exactly did that entail? I mean, like, what was she was technically, Allison Mack was your master, yes?
Yes, and the way she described it to me is, she's like, imagine it as a guru and a student. Like, you are, and I'm rolling my eyes, but I think that was how they were trying to normalize it. But really what it was ultimate control. And that was what we were saying yes to when we said yes to the sorority, was to have somebody have total control over your life's decisions. And like what you said before, kind of alleviate the burden of making choices. That was the way that they pitched it to us. That they were going to help us become our highest self, by not letting us back away from the things that we were afraid of. So sounds kind of logical in a personal growth sense, or in a I want a really tough trainer sense, but it is totally taking away your free will and your rights as a human being.
So when you talk about total control, you're talking about everything, like when you can eat, when you can go out. I
Well, you
mean,
can see if you can have sex, if you can, what you can eat, what you can watch, if you're going to have to give collateral and then you're going to have to give it on a monthly basis. I mean, there are lots of restrictions and lots of protocol in place that you are supposed to become okay with. Now, cut to almost a year of being in DOS that we're branded, and we were branded thinking that we were getting this symbol of the elements, this thing that was going to bond all the women in the group together, and we thought that this was going to be us pushing against our most primal fear, like the fear
and
of
just
the
to
body.
be clear, when you say branded, you mean literal, like medieval
No,
branding.
not like a cow,
Okay,
but with a cauterizing pen. Have you ever seen that? They
I have.
use
Yeah,
scarification. I
yeah.
see you have tattoos like me. So
Right.
it was something that I had never seen before or experienced. There was no anesthesia given to us. There was no painkillers of any kind. And I was the first of my group to be branded by Dr. Danielle Roberts, who was also in my group. And it was an out of body experience. I mean, that's kind of the best way for me to describe it. And we give a very um, detailed visual of that in Seduced.
Yeah.
And we use animation because we didn't want to exploit or trigger any women in recreating that scene. So we use animation for that, to depict just the sheer like ritualistic elements of it, which at the time I thought, oh, I'm just doing this with some women that I really care about, and this is something for me to prove to myself.
Mm, yeah.
Um, but looking back and knowing what the brand actually stands for, it was really disturbing for me to figure out that it was Keith's initials, because I later on realized that often pimps will do that with prostitutes. They will mark them or brand them or disfigure them in order to claim them as property. And so that to me, there's no difference in what Keith Raniere was trying to do and that. We were just lied to.
Oh God.
I know it's a lot, but I know we only have limited time, so I was like, I'll just try to get it all out.
Oh, please. So you escape this thing. You're in the city. When do you go into deep
While
program?
my mom is still doing all of her anti-Nxivm press in order to bring down this cult with other defectors, like the Sarah Edmondsons, like the Mark Vicentes, like other people who became Jane Does and were anonymous throughout the trial, who also helped. So I was still in while they were doing all of that, and then I got out, but I wasn't totally on the other side until later on in that summer.
So you go into the deep programming. Uh, what is that specifically? What was that experience like? Can you just walk us through?
Yeah, um, it was exactly what I needed,
Mm,
and I had a couple experiences with other therapists who my mom had tried to set me up with, and they really rubbed me the wrong way. I was very triggered by talk therapy because of my experiences in Nxivm, and I was distrustful of people. I didn't know who I could really open up to, and I was afraid. So I had a lot of resistance and a lot of barriers up around people helping me.
mm,
Diane, who I ended up really clicking with, she just started by talking to me on the phone. And we would talk for several hours a day on my way to work, on my way home from work, on the bridge, sometimes 4 to 5 hours, sometimes 2, sometimes 1, whatever I needed for that day. And we would process everything from my life. And it was her way of re-engaging, one, my critical thinking, but also reconnecting me to my soul, like who I am and where I come from. And a lot of that had to do with my childhood and my family and all the things that they had tried to sever while I was in Nxivm. She was trying to re-engage in my memories.
Right.
So there were times where I would just cry. There were times that I would laugh. There were times that I had major aha revelations. But the indoctrination is very deep, especially around what we were taught in DOS. And it took me 6 months to even say that anything sexual had happened with me and Keith. That's 6 months of talking hours a day. And I couldn't even go there.
Sure.
So it was intense, but it was also so respectful. And the way she did it was just with a lot of kindness and a lot of care and a lot of patience.
Yeah. Wow. And so do you ever find yourself just angry? Like, I
Yeah.
mean, like, I'm angry for you, and I had nothing to do, you know what I mean? Like,
Why do you think I buck like 3 times a
yeah.
week?
Right.
I
You
have
gotta
to.
get
I
something,
have
like,
to get shit out. And
yeah.
and I think that that is my way of taking care of myself, is recognizing that my anger is legitimate, but it doesn't have to control my life.
Mhm.
It's just something that I have to deal with sometimes. And I I often just tell my fiance, like, I'm feeling a little wiggy right now, like I'm feeling weird, like when I can't quite tell what's going on for me, like I'm angry or I'm sad or I'm upset or I'm overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And I use exercise a lot for that. It's been huge for my healing and just kind of having mental clarity. Um, so I definitely feel angry at times. I think I was so angry for a really long time. And I think sometimes it's easy to get stuck there, because it feels strong and you kind of feel protected, like no one can fuck with me if
Yeah.
I'm angry. But I was really closed off from feeling a lot of other things, and I didn't like that. So that was another layer that I had to go into, and underneath that anger was a lot of grief and a lot of sadness that I wasn't ready to confront until I was. And so for me, this has been a journey and a process of kind of going layer by layer in something that I've never experienced or done before. So I've been doing a lot of reading and a lot of studying and a lot of writing and just trying to figure it out for myself so that maybe I can be more helpful to other people.
Yeah. And so you are engaged now. Congratulations. How did you find your way into allowing that into your life after everything you've been through? You know?
I wasn't looking
How
I was not looking for it at all. I mean, and I love that your podcast is called Side Hustle because I feel like his name's Patrick, and Patrick really helps me connect to my side hustle because I love the food world, and he's a chef, and specifically pizza. And
yeah.
so sometimes we've worked together in the past, and we've like done little private pizza parties where we'll go to some wealthy person's house and make pizza for their kids, and we're like, yeah, $50 tip, woohoo!
Right.
And, and that's like our side hustle
There you
uh,
go.
that I get to do with him, and it gives me a little bit of my love of food and my love of hospitality, and it balances out this other work that I'm doing, which is like super cerebral and from the heart and trauma and pain and cults and
Right.
heavy. So I need a little lightness sometimes, and Patrick really provides that for me. So he's good. He's good like that. And he's from Philly, and we met in New York City, and he he was so kind and so non-judgmental of me that I think that was the thing that really helped me open up. He had studied journalism in college, and and like how you started the interview, he said, I've read everything, but I just kind of want to know from you. And that was so significant to me because I just felt like a fucking human being. Like that people were not, makes me want to cry, but that people were so used to just like processing people through the media as one dimensional. Like, you're a cult girl, you're a sex slave, you're a this, you're a that, you're Keith Raniere's, no, I'm India Oxenberg. Like, I'm a person that has a lot of feelings and a lot of, thoughts about this, but I wasn't ready to process them. And Patrick let me kind of open up that wound and feel safe enough to share in a place where I had felt very judged. So he did that, and he became my friend, and then he became my boyfriend, and then he became my fiance, and he will become my husband. And I think for me, it's been about learning to let myself be loved and not be so afraid of that. And also learning to stand up for myself when I need to create a boundary, not only with him, but with other people in my work. And that's my Achilles heel. And I know that about myself. And so
You're
I
not
have to.
at all.
What?
You're not alone there at
Yeah,
all.
I know that. And that's why I like to talk about it, because I think so often we feel shameful about that. Like, oh, I'm weak, or what's wrong with me that I just fold when my mom calls, or my boyfriend asked me to run an errand for him and I forget about myself. And I think that's a silly light example, but I think everyone can relate to that.
Right. Definitely. So with regards to cults in general, like we were saying before, in the past they've been more religion focused. But Nxivm, I feel like maybe they're not the first of their kind, but I feel like they were definitely the most high profile in recent memory. And the fact that they use this sort of, com-
Pseudoscience.
yeah, well, like commerce, career, consumerism sort of thing. Do you see cults moving in that direction in the
Yes,
future, that very 21st century? Yeah.
you nailed it. I have been, it gives me chills because I have been doing a lot of research about different groups. And it scares me because I'm seeing this trend of online communities that are cults, some that even are getting people to change their sexes in order to find their, I'm quoting here, but their twin flame, convincing them that maybe they were born the wrong sex and they need to be a man or a woman. There's a lot of manipulation going on the internet that's very dangerous. And I think, especially with the pandemic and coronavirus and all of us being at home, I'd say be even more vigilant to your online communities, to your chats, to the people who are trying to get you into something or even in sales. I'm seeing a huge trend in consumer products related to cults, and that's how they fund themselves. That it's not only curriculum, it's not only come and listen to this teacher, because that's not really happening right now. It's log into our website, see our course curriculum, and then join our online community. And then, that could be your 16-year-old daughter upstairs in her bedroom in a cult.
Yeah.
And you don't know. And that's why I feel even more compelled to speak about these things and to talk about the red flags and write about them and share my experience, because I think it's going to help. I think it's going to help somebody say, oh my God, was that that weirdo that emailed me yesterday to come to Hawaii and join his farm? Like,
Yeah.
you never know who people really are until they earn trust and you earn trust with them. And so I would say be careful not to assume too much, especially on the internet right now.
Yeah. Would you agree that anything that kind of revolves around a sort of group ideology should be examined a little bit further? I mean, like, because I feel
Yes.
weird about groups in general. Like, people just behave differently when they get around each other.
And group mentality is a real thing.
Right.
It
Right.
can be a wonderful thing, or it can be a dangerous thing. So like you said, I think it's just worth investigating. Like, not all groups are bad, and not all like religions are not bad. I mean, it's the people who take them and use them in order to exploit people or prey on people or mislead and coerce them. That's bad. That's and that's inhumane.
Right.
And that is something that I just don't tolerate. And so I think it's worth investigating. And it's also something that I've realized that I need is trusted counsel in my life. And whether that's a family member or a coworker or an aunt or an uncle, somebody who loves you but is also somewhat neutral to give you good advice to help you navigate tricky situations. Because if you're like me or like you and you have a vulnerability or an Achilles heel to certain things, there's other people who don't, and they can help you see that or course correct.
And that's really extremely hard to find because I feel like anytime I hear someone's 2 cents or opinion, it can't help but be laced with bias. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that takes a lot of work to find somebody trusted to kind of give you an opinion that you can go with, right? Especially on coming out of that situation that you were in for sure.
Right. And then on the flip side, I have to work really hard to rebuild my intuition and just my connection to my gut, like my sense, because that was tampered with while I was in the group. And that's something that um, they considered very negative because it got in the way with what they wanted, which was logical decision making, not decisions made on intuition or emotion, because they couldn't control that. And so I've had to work to just get a little bit more sensitive to what I'm feeling and make sure that I'm not overriding that sense, but I'm considering it and it's part of my evaluation. And so that's like my homework too.
Right.
And
Well,
then you got to find people who will support that and also question the shit out of things.
yeah,
That's my, that's the moral of my story.
yeah, ask questions.
Ask a
The
lot of
audience, please ask questions before you do
questions.
anything. India, thank you so much. We're here at the end. Do you want to plug anything? Something you have coming up?
Um, well, I'd love to know what you think about Seduced. That is definitely something I'm curious about.
Absolutely.
And um, I wrote a book that's exclusively on Audible. It is called Still Learning, and it's there for download. I'm really proud of it. I kind of just like let it all out there. It was my way to get it all out on paper before I was ready to talk about it.
Right.
So I hope that people will enjoy that.
And people can find you on Instagram. Is that your only social media?
Yeah, that is. I'm trying to consolidate it. I'm not great at social media, so I thought if I had too many platforms, I'd lose it. So I'm just gonna bring everything to Instagram so they can find me there. It's India Oxenberg. It's me, and I'll probably respond, but it's taking me a long time to get through my messages because they're
Right.
so heartfelt that I feel like, okay, I really need to write back to this one.
I mean, you've been doing a ton of interviews and press for a while now. So,
Yeah, a
yeah.
couple months now. So I think I'm close to the tail end.
Okay.
I don't know if that's really true, but
Right.
we can pretend.
Right. All right. Well, I
You.
appreciate you so much, and hopefully we can get you back on sometime in the future.
I'd love that. It was so good to meet you. I'm sure there's plenty of things that we could discuss.
Absolutely.